get rid of all my mess. Okay, we're going to be making the pot holder today. And shoot, I've got to hold on one second. I got to be able to see what I'm doing here. Okay. So here's our pot holder, 2 fabrics, fabric on the back, 2 pieces. I'll go over the cutting instructions again. If you have a rotating mat or some kind, that will make it easier for you when you go to trim. Let's see. So I did make a correction on the pot holder, so I'm going to read the cutting instructions again. So you need 1 square for the back, 8 by 9. The other square for the back, which will be folded in half so that it has a nice finished edge, that piece is 6 by 9. So those fabrics should be the same. That, and they don't have to be, but they usually are. And then this part, the bottom bigger part of the pot holder, is 7 by 9, and the top of the pot holder, so from here up, is 3.5 by 9. The ribbon I cut, you can use, 3/8 or 1/2, or you could make your own little loop, is about 6 inches long because it's going to be folded in half. The regular batting is 9 by 9, 9 inches by 9 inches, and a piece of Insul Bright is 9 inches by 9 inches. And of course, you can make this to any size that you want, depending what you want for a pot holder. We are going to trim it down a little bit. So I'm going to grab a couple of fabrics. So if anyone hasn't cut yet, you can go ahead and cut. I have a layer cake that I'm just taking some pieces out of it. Guess I'll go green this time. Or you know what? Maybe, yeah. Maybe I'll do the same one again. I'll do it in tan this time. But this one I had like a little wood grain fabric on the top. No, it doesn't. My light doesn't want to go. Let's do it this way. Let's try this. There. So see, it's like planks, like a wood grain plank. Yes, Gloria. The back, at 9 by 9, it was a little too big, so I made it 8 by 9. But if you have it 9 by 9, hi Christine. I see you finally found your link. Okay, good for you. Good doing. I had originally cut it 9 by 9, and you still could, because it would come up higher here. But you just don't want it to catch in this seam. So I just came down that inch. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions. That's okay, Christine. I was having technical difficulties, so you wouldn't have got in too early anyway. So let's see. I need one more fabric. Is anybody sewing along today? And I know you can't yell out the answer, obviously, so let's see. Rhonda can't find the chat box. She has to sign into YouTube. So maybe I'll put the writing on the front of this one. No, I don't want to do that. See, can't decide what I'm doing. I dropped all my fabrics on the floor. You know how it is. So I'm trying to find another plank one, and I'm not. Oh, you know what? I have a piece left. I could do that again, couldn't I? See, Lynn, you're just watching today? Okay. So am I sewing by myself today? So I'm just going to go over the cutting very quickly. That's what I got for pieces here. So I'm going to cut my backs first. So I want one square to be, I want it 9 inches by 8 inches. So if you're doing like this fabric is, that's directional. So this is kind of directional because it really depended how the trucks would look on there. And of course this is directional. So you just want to be aware when you're cutting directional to keep your 9 inches is your width on the smaller pieces. On the pieces that aren't well, nothing's 9-inch square. So this one's going to be 8 by 9. Oh, I almost cut it 8 by 8. So 8 by 9. And this is my back, so I'm just going to set it aside. So that's the bottom of my back. And the top of my back is 6 by 9. So I'm going to cut it 6. Twirled the wrong way. I'll just do it this way. In case you can't twirl, you can just do this. By 9. This is going to be a case because you have batting and Insel Bright. So this is so you have batting and Insel Bright. So if you're sewing along, you might want to use your walking foot because once you get to the point of having the batting and the Insel Bright, it gets a little thick, and then your fabric starts to push. And I'll show you how that happens. So this fabric for the back, we're just going to fold in half, wrong sides together, and press it. And my iron's just a little out of camera. So you would just press that one. And so here's my 2 back pieces. Here's my bigger piece, and here's my smaller piece. And this fold is going to go over the raw edge of the other back piece, so you won't have any raw edges showing, and my iron wasn't hot enough. So there's my two back pieces, and I'm just going to set those aside for now. And my front piece, I grabbed the yellow out, and I meant to grab the green one. So my front bottom piece, that's this section right here. So my front bottom is going to be 7 by 9. So I'm just going to come right across and get my 7. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and I'm just going to set that over here for a minute. And then the top of my pot holder, which is this section right here, is going to be 3.5 by 9. So my ruler is 3 inches. So I'm going to, let me see if I can, let me see if I can go back a little bit and show you what I do. back as far as I can go. So my ruler is 3 inches. So I just I can set my fabric at the 1/2 inch and then just go over and see how I have that 1/2 inch. Or I can use my mat entirely, put my fabric at the edge, and count over 1, 2, 3 and a half. Put my ruler on its halfway mark. Okay, so here's my top piece. This is not folded because we're going to sew this edge in. And here's my bottom. Oh, I forgot to do the 9. Oh no, wait a minute. Hold on. Let's make sure I got this right. 9. Yeah, I forgot to do my 9, or I cut the wrong side off. But that's okay. That happens. Okay, so there's my 2 pieces for my top. So I'm going to set my pot holder, that out of the way. Here's my 2 front pieces. So the next thing I need is my batting. And I have my batting all cut right behind me. Hold on. Excuse me. When I was fixing or panicking over the live, I dropped everything. So let me just cut another piece here. I have a bunch of pieces. I don't want to pick up the wrong one. So I'm just going to cut this 9 inches, and I can cut it a little extra. It isn't going to, we're going to trim it afterwards anyway. So this is going to be 9 by 9. Keep ending up on there we go. And I'm using regular sewing thread for the whole project, weight-wise, but you could use anything you want. Let me see how. Okay, so what we first, slow down a little. Christina, I thought you were already cut. Sorry, I'll slow down a little for you. I thought you were cut ahead of time. Okay, so I have my batting that's 9 by 9. I'm going to take my fabric bottom, big piece, and I'm going to lay that down. Let me back up a little bit. Back up. Hold on. That give you a little better view. Oh. Okay. So I'm going to lay. I'm trying to see if you can see the whole section. There we go. Sorry, I didn't mean to wiggle the camera quite that much. Okay, so I'm going to lay my bottom fabric piece on my batting, and I'm going to bring it down to the bottom. And you don't have to be exactly at the bottom, but you can be pretty close. But what we want to do is we want to quilt this first before we put our top piece on. That way, however you end this quilting up here, whether you tie it or however you do it, when we put the top piece on with a seam allowance, it'll cover that. So you don't. So in this case, we can quilt up and right off onto the batting, and then going back and forth. So you don't have to be exact up here, but you want to be past this fabric or at the edge of this fabric. Does that make sense? Christine, I only changed one size fabric. That would be the back. It was 9 by 9, and now it is 8 by 9, so you can just trim an inch off. There are no other changes. Okay? Okay, so we want to quilt this first, and you can spray baste it down. I'm going to just give it a little iron. What we're doing, so let me back up for a minute. Okay, let's just take a minute and let's look at this pot holder, and I'll turn it towards this way. And let me come in a little bit. Okay, so what we're doing, how we're making this pot holder is we're going to quilt this bottom part first. So this is your big bottom part. We're going to quilt this first with just the batting. So we're going to take your backing fabrics and your Insulbright and set those aside. Those will come towards the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our batting down, put the fabric on top, and we're going to quilt it. But we're only quilting this bottom part. If you want to quilt this part, I'm going to show how I did. In this case, I did a decorative stitch. Let's see if I can get more light on that. There's a decorative stitch right along there, or you could embroider along there. Whatever you do along here is not going to show on the back because the back and the Insulbright aren't there yet. Okay? So we're going to quilt this bottom, and then we're going to attach this fabric with a seam. So we're going to lay it right sides together, stitch across, flip it up, and press it, and then stitch on this if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can stitch on this. The reason I do that is because when we're quilting up and down here, we're not going to end up exactly perfect across this top. So by not putting this on before we do the quilting, it's going to cover up where you start and stop. So you don't have to be perfect on your start and stop here. You don't have to be perfect on this end because that's in the seam allowance. So we're putting both ends of where your quilting starts and stops inside of seam allowances. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Then once we have this top done with the batting, we're going to stitch on our ribbon, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to just stitch it so it just stays in place. Then we're going to add our Insulbright to the back, and we'll just stitch a little bit to hold that in place and trim it, make sure it's all right. Then we put the two top pieces on, stitch all the way around, and then we turn it right side out through this little area right here, and you'll be done. So you don't have to leave an opening on one side that you have to hand stitch close. We're going to turn right through this. So everything will be nice and smooth and pretty all the way around. So does that make sense? So let me set this aside again. So I have just my batting, and I have my big fabric for the bottom front. That's the piece that is 7 by 9. And I'm going to give it a little press because it helps it adhere to the batting. But you could spray this if you want or pin it. But then let me just give it a little press again, and then I'm going to show you how I marked it. So you can see on here, can you see the stitching? I did stitching every inch, just vertical lines. And because I'm using a friction pen, I've got to wait a second for it to cool off because the friction pen goes away with heat, so it won't stay if I don't let it cool off. So let's stop for a second for anybody that's sewing or cutting along, And let's see if anybody has any questions. I'm sorry for the rush in the beginning. I had a panic when I couldn't get the stream going. Had a moment. If you want to make note, when we do the quilting, when I quilt, I go to a 3.0 stitch length. So I'm going to go now and make sure I have a 3.0 stitch length. And I'm going to use, let me see, I'm going to use a thread with some color. So I switched my colors on myself, so let's see. I did that one with a kind of a blue, and we got green going. So, let's try that one. Oh, can you see? I'm going to try that one. Like, well, you know what? Let's live on the edge and go green, and that way you'll be able to see it. So I'm using a green that's close to my top fabric. Now that I've got this out, if I was going to do a decorative stitch on this top fabric, this isn't a good color to do. I'm going to, excuse me for getting in your way there a second. There we go. So I'm going to pick a different color that I can see. Because if I'm going to do a decorative stitch on here, I'd at least like it to show. So let me take this golden color. So I'm going to change my thread to what I'm going to be using for my quilting, because I'm quilting before I'm doing my sewing. So I want to make sure that depending on which machine you have, I have a machine that has the threader that plunges down on the side. So I always want to make sure I do my needle up down so that my needle's in the right place. I don't want to use my wheel to do it because I don't know exactly where it needs to be. So it's easier just to do your needle up down. With things sticking to me. Okay, so I'm all threaded. So you want to make note, excuse me for being in the way again. So our first step in sewing is going to be place the bottom front fabric at the bottom of the batting square, and using a 3.0, we're going to do some quilt stitches. Now, I use 3.0. You could use something different. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to mark it. And let me see if I can back that up a little more. Okay, so I want to mark this. And I don't generally, as a rule, want my first stitch right down the center. I like a stitch on either side of the center. So my block, remember, is 9 inches wide. So 4.5 would be the center. So let me see if I can, what I can mark it with that you'll see the best. So what I would do is I'm just going to go to the 4.5 and I'm just going to make a mark. So I've made a mark here and here. Let me see if I can come in closer. So if you can see, you see I made a mark here and here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I want my quilting 1 inch apart from each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a 1/2 inch past the mark I made and draw a line down. And I'll hold it up again. Okay? So you can see that line. So I drew that line down. Now I'm just going to turn my mat. So you can turn your block around, and I want to go a 1/2 inch to the other side of that line, of that original mark I made. And I'll show you, I'll hold it up so you can see the whole exact thing. So I would do that first. So you can see, here's my original mark for the center, and then I went a 1/2 inch on either side. So now, instead of having a line down the center, I have a 1/2 inch on either side of center. Okay? Hi, Rhonda. So now what I'm going to do is, let me back up again. Here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark 1 inch from each line. So I'm going to take my ruler, put my 1 inch mark on the line I just drew, and draw another line and keep going across. And you know, to always be careful with these friction pens, because they aren't really made for fabric. They were originally made for paper. And you need to test to see if your lines are going to disappear when you iron them. I can tell you with a batik, you probably should use chalk. Now I have about, let me see, I have about almost 1 inch left, and I don't care. If I had 1.5 inches, I would still stop away, because remember, I'm going to do probably like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So as long as I go equally in both directions, it doesn't matter if I end a little earlier. Generally, you feel like you're ending a little earlier than you think you should, but you'll be fine, because it'll be the same on both sides. So now I'm just going down the other side. So I'm putting my 1 inch mark of my ruler on the last line I drew. Oh, that was a weak line that I drew there. There we go. And it might be easier to draw it before you put it on the batting, but to be honest with you, I never think to until I'm on my batting. Not that I just can't take it off, but it generally works out all right. You don't need a lot of line to follow. You just need to get the general idea of where you're going. Okay, so let me set that aside and get rid of the pens. Sorry, I'm anal, I have to put everything away. So now, see, I have all my lines drawn. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start, I can start in my batting, but I don't want to start back so far that I flip this fabric up. So I'm going to start at the beginning and come down and stop. And then I'm going to come up and stop. And then I'm going to come over to, so I'm going to work each side. I'm going to go one side, then the other side. And I'm going up and then down, and then up and then down. Generally with something this small, you don't have to do that. But it's just a good habit to get into, because you really, if you're doing a bigger quilt or a bigger project, you really need to keep that in mind. So it's just a good habit to have. So again, I'm checking my machine to make sure I have a 3.0 stitch length. If your main stitch length is 3.0 instead of mine's 2.5, if my main stitch length was 3.0, then I'd go to 3.5. I'd go up a little bit. But again, personal preference. But you're starting to go through thickness, so if you have a smaller stitch length, you're going to have smaller stitches than usual, because the thread, there's the same amount of thread between the bobbin and the between the back and the front, so that if you still have the same amount of thread and you're going through more thickness, then the stitches are actually going to be smaller than they normally would be if you were just going through 2 fabrics. Okay, does anybody have any questions before I start stitching this? Okay, and I'll keep watching, because I know there's a little delay. Oh, I put a piece of tape on here. I'll show you after why I did that. I'll stick that tape there so you guys can remind me when I'm looking for my tape that that's where it is. Just yell to me. So let me bring my machine a little further forward. I don't know if it'll really make any difference, but I mean visually. So let me put I have a baby lock. So baby lock in brother, your main foot is your J foot. If you have a Janome, I believe it's your A foot. I think, I'm not positive. But it's your main foot that most machines have, and it has that little button on the side. And I'm using that because I've got a little line right in the middle that I can go by. If you're using the open toe one, I would use an open toe. I don't know if you can see that. The open toe has some red lines on it. On some of the open toes, not on all of them. So whatever foot works best for you, use that one. I'll just use my J foot because I know everybody has their main foot. My sewing machine happens to have a pivot feature, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to make sure my pivot's on. And I'm going to start with either the one that's left or right of that center. And my machine's up higher than I am. So there's a line in the middle of my foot, so I can line my line of my foot up with the line that I drew. So if you're sewing along, you go ahead and get ready to go ahead and sew. And I'm just going to get to the end, and I'm just going to cut my thread. I don't need to lock it because I'm going to have a seam allowance coming across here. And I'm going to have a seam allowance coming across the top. So I don't need to take all that extra time and have all those little bulky bumps in there. So I sewed down, and I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to sew back up. And I'm going to sew back up to the other side of the middle marked line. And normally I would sew a little bit slower, but I know a lot of you are watching that aren't sewing, so I didn't want to be too tedious on you. So I came up with that one. I'm just going to turn, and I'm going to go down the next one. And again, if you forget which way you were going, it's not the end of the world. And I'm going to go to the opposite side of where so I'm working the left and the right, then the left and the right. And I'll work them both in the same direction. And I'm going to turn and go back. So now when I go back, I'm going to come back on the left side, then I'm going to come back on the right side. And if you're not right at the very edge, it's okay. There's going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance down there. And you could actually come off right onto the batting. That's fine. It isn't going to hurt a thing. So I came down on the left. Now I'm going to go over to the right to the next line that's not stitched. Okay. Then I'm going to turn. And now I'm going to go back down the other way. And we're almost done. And then I'm going to go, I did the left, now I'm going to do the right. So the quilting is all done. So can you see it? And I'm just going to go, and I'm going to give it a little press because it's all kind of wrinkly. So now you can see I think it's easier if I do go this way. You bring it in and then I'll move this up. So there's my quilting done. Okay, and it just wrinkles when it's handed up. So now, I have a couple of options, and sorry, here we go. So so the first thing I want to do is put my thread length, my stitch length back to in my case it's 2.5. So I'm just going to put it back. Otherwise I forget. So when I'm done, when I change my stitch length, the minute I'm done stitching, before I do anything, I change that back, because if I say to myself, oh, I'll just do it when I start, well, I'll forget. Because you're ready to start, and you just, you want to start, and you go, and then you go, oh, yeah, that's right, I was supposed to do that. So now, for example, if I had used a quilting thread or a thicker thread, well, now I'm going to do a seam along here. And I could leave that same thread in this case I probably will, but if it was a thicker thread, you might want to go ahead and take that out and put your regular sewing thread in. This is regular sewing thread that I'm using, and I can just go ahead and leave it if I want to. But if this was a bright red, I really wouldn't want that seam done with a bright red. So, you want to take the time to change your thread. It's not a big deal. And once you make one pot holder, and then you're going to make a bunch more, then I would cut them all out. I would do the quilting on all of them, kind of do a bunch of them in steps together. And that way you're not changing your thread quite as much. So now, this is the bottom, this is the top, and see I still have my batting plane here. So now I'm just going to take my top fabric that's going to go here. I'm going to put it right sides together. And I'm just going to do a seam. 1/4 inch seam, a little more than 1/4. It doesn't matter. Just try to keep it straight. This isn't a quilt, so we don't have to be exact. So for me, I'm just going to use the edge of my foot, of my J foot, because it probably be a little bit more than 1/4 inch, and that's fine. But I'm going to use the edge of my foot as my guide. And again, remember, I put my stitch length back to 2.5. So if you're writing any of this down, just what I do is I will take, and I might write down what I'm going to do, and then when I have my stitch length, so I'll put 2.5, and I'll put a circle around it, and that way it sticks out for me. Again, I don't need to lock my stitch at the beginning and the end. I can if I want to, but I at least want to get my fabric on, right? There we go. I can if I want to, but I don't need to, because the seam allowance is going to be going all the way around to catch all those edges. So I'm going to sew at the speed I would normally sew at, because the fastest stitcher isn't the best stitcher. So just relax and just stitch along. And you notice my hands stay in the front. I'm not back here pulling things, because if you have to pull your fabric from back here, then you need either a new machine or send your machine in for service. Thought I was doing that. Okay, so I've done my seam. You can see that seam allowance. So now I just need to press this up, and when I press it or push it up, I want to make sure that I don't leave a bump here or a crease here where the two meet. So when I press this, I'm going to press just a little bit this way. So we'll pretend my mouse is my iron. I'm going to press like this, and I'm going to stop here. I don't need to go off the edge, because when I do that, I start warping my fabrics. So let me just give that a quick press. Okay, so now you can see we've got the beginning of our potholder going, and let me come in closer. And now, you see, everything is really nice and neat along here. It doesn't matter if I went longer or shorter and everything, you know, the stitches coming up and down weren't in line with each other. You don't have to worry about that because this took care of that issue right there. So now it's all nice and neat. And it makes you look like the best sewer in the whole world. Whoop, back up again. Okay. So now, and I know you're going to have extra fabric here. And again, I tend to cut things a little bigger, especially for a class like this, just to be on, because we can always cut some off, but we can't glue it back on again. So I just want to, if I want to do a stitch across here, I can. So I think maybe this time, because I'm going to be cut off about here, I think I'll just put a stitch along this edge, a little above where the seam allowance is. And I'm going to do something simple. Let's see if I can find something simple. So I look at something simple and then I get all involved in something that's not simple. But when you're doing your first one, well, I keep picking the wrong page. There we go. So I'm just going to do, let's see, trying to see what will go faster. Isn't this terrible when you go to do stitches and you just can't make up your mind what you want to do? So let's go with, let's just go with it. I got a little simple kind of, looks like an asterisk, but it's got some straight lines. And I'm going to go a distance away from this seam. So you could, if you wanted, you could draw a line. I'm going to change my foot because my machine told me I needed to. So if you have the same type of machine as I do, Brother or Babylock, it would be your end foot for decorative stitches. I'm not going to touch the stitch length or width. I'm going to leave it what it's recommended to be. And this time, I'm going to use the left side, this side over here, of my foot to go along the edge of this seam. We don't often get to do that. Usually everything's on the right side. And if you want to stitch it in place, to lock it, you can. But again, it's going to be in the seam allowance, so it's okay. And you don't have to start at the very edge so that you're hanging half on the fabric and half off of it. Just come onto the fabric because we can take about a 1/2 inch seam. So for those of you that are going along, if you're still doing your quilting, that's okay. I'm trying to keep my hands out of your way as best I can. I know you can't see right in there, but and if I wanted to here, I could do several rows of stitches. And I didn't have to come to the very edge, so let me zoom in a little. So see, I didn't come to the very edge. I'm trying to get in the best light here. I'm maybe 1/4 of an inch away. Can you see that last little dot? And that's actually, I haven't used this stitch before. Let me zoom in so you can see it. Oh, all right, you have to give me a minute because I have to be in a different direction than I think I do. So it's like little tiny asterisks with stitching in between. If you're using a baby lock or a brother, it's in section 6, and it's number 31 on this particular machine, but this stitch should be in just about every brother baby lock, probably most any machine that has decorative stitches in, because this is one of the fairly basic ones. Can you see it? Oh, there we go. There, now you can really see it now. And see, by using the edge of my foot on the left, it kept it that, I think that's a pretty good distance away. Okay, so let me back us back up again. There we go. Okay, so we've got our quilting done on the bottom. It's all nice and smooth here because we did this seam. Now we've done our decorative stitching. If you had wanted to do an embroidery here on your embroidery machine, you could have embroidered on this fabric before you even put it on here. You just have to be aware of, you want to keep it more towards one side than the other, but you'll have to hoop a bigger piece anyways. So when you cut it, bring it over to your pot holder and, lay it down, flip it over so you have that seam allowance and see how it fits, and just make note of it for the rest of them that you do, because they'll be all the same. Okay? So now I'm just going to straighten this up a little bit because I can see I'm all crooked all over the place. So let me push this back a little. Oh, so now I'm going to make sure I go back to my regular stitching. So my regular straight stitching, and I'm on 2.5. Move that out of the way a little. Let me put this up here. Oh, hold on, my chair's in my own, I'm in my own way here. There we go. So now, if you can see, and you see on my top, I'm a little crooked. And again, it doesn't matter what size pot holder you end up with. I mean, you don't want one that's like microwave size. Well, you could, but if you need extra fabric to trim, then cut everything 10 inches instead of 9 inches. Just go an inch bigger on everything. I want to keep in mind this straight stitch here. So I have to, what I'm doing is, and I can tell now, I've sewn crooked. I've sewn across here crooked because I'm on such a downhill. Because what I'm doing is I'm taking the edge of this, where the two colors meet, this seam, and I'm lining them up with a line on my mat to get them straight. And I'm lining up my lines coming down as equal as I can. And I am a little off. So what I'm going to do is, when I put my ruler down, I'm going to run one of the lines on the ruler along this line and try to keep everything as straight as I can. And I'm just going to clean up the edges. And now I'll go all the way around to the other side. And I'll do this. Doesn't matter what size it is, I'm just cleaning off the edges, and I'm making sure that I keep a line on my ruler in line with my seam going across. I probably need to come in just a little bit more. And what I'm trying to do is making sure my fabric is straight, that I don't have a piece of fabric that comes out further than the rest, because I need to use this, all these edges, as for my sewing lines. So that I'm going to do the same on the bottom, and I can run these lines along with my lines that I quilted. So that helps me keep everything straight. And we don't have to be perfect. This isn't our prom dress, So we're okay. It's just a pot holder, and it's just our first pot holder. Now I'm going to do the other side, and now I don't have these lines. If I have a bigger ruler, I can use these lines. So if I have a wider ruler, I can still use my quilt lines. But my ruler isn't quite wide enough, but I can use this seam line. And I want to make sure that I got to look and see where my batting is. If I can't get exactly this going and this going together, I kind of go between the two. So I might be a little off with this one and just a little off with this one to make it work. It doesn't have to be perfect. But now it looks much better than it did. I can still see it's off, but it's okay. I seriously went downhill here. Okay, so now I've got this done. So the next thing I want to do is my ribbon. So I need about 6 inches of ribbon. And again, you could make your own pot holder loop, or you could have a pot holder with no loop, whatever makes you happy. Okay, I want to have my pot holder facing right way too, so I don't put my loop on the wrong side. So if you're left-handed or you prefer your loop on this side instead of this side, that's fine. You want your loop in the middle, you can do that too. I'm going to put mine on this edge. And what I'm going to do is I fold it in half so that the fold is going to be inside here on the fabric. Okay? So I'm going to take my tape that I used on my machine. I'll be looking for that. And I'm going to take this down and let me come in a little bit. Oh. Hold on. Let me get up. Right, there we go. Didn't leave myself much room here. Hold on. There we go. So what I want to do is, here's my edge where I want this. I'm going to fold my ribbon in half, and if your ribbon has a right side and a wrong side, you want the right side facing out. And I'm going to take that ribbon, and I'm going to put it, let me go back a little bit. I want to make sure I have enough ribbon for my loop that when I fold this ribbon up, and it's in the seam allowance, don't forget, that I have enough loop left. Can you do that? But I want to have enough ribbon that it just hangs off of this edge just a little bit. And I'm going to tape it down here. I can't tape up here because it's hanging off of each edge. So I'm taping it here. And see how there's a little bit that's hanging off? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch across here. Just put a few stitches in so I know once I put my my fabrics on and I can't see it, I know it's not going to move. So I'm going to go ahead and, pardon my, let me bring the machine in a little closer. So I'm just going to put a little stitching in, and I can stitch along the top in like 1/8 of an inch or so. I just want a few stitches there just to hold the ribbon in place so I don't have to have tape up there. That's all. And I'm just going to lock it just so it doesn't come undone. Okay, now I'm going to take my tape off because I taped up closer to the edges that were flopping around. So I know this tape will get caught in my seam, but I want to keep an eye on my ribbon. So I'm just going to tape way down here. So you see how I'm just taping my ribbon so it doesn't sneak out on me and get caught out here or out here when I have the fabric on top of it. And it doesn't matter if it's straight or not straight. Just don't tape it so you've curled this edge up. You want to make sure that it lays nice and flat. Okay? So I'm just going to stop for a second to see if anybody needs to catch up or has any questions. or needs any review. If anyone needs any review at this point before I go further, let me know. Or if you need to get a drink of water. So the next thing I'm going to be working on is my Insulbright. So I'm going to get my piece of Insulbright. I'm going to take it just a second so that anyone that's stitching along doesn't feel like they're rushed. And I will get myself a drink of water at the same time. Okay, is everybody doing okay so far? Now I put my water behind my machine, so watch me forget that when I go to move my machine back. So I've got I have this long piece of Insulbright left, and I didn't cut it off until I know how much I need. Now Insulbright has two sides, and one is more shiny than the other, and I put the more shiny towards the back. And here's my thought. I have no clue if it's right. Oh, Christine, you want to see the back of my potholder? There you go. Doesn't matter if it's pretty or not, Christine. No one's going to see it. So if you're a little wrinkly back here, Christine, if you're a little wrinkly with your batting, it's okay. It's okay. So my reasoning for putting the shiny side, so think of the shiny side towards the heat, because the shiny side is the metal parts. And I'm thinking I'd rather have it stop the heat sooner than if I turned it over and it comes in and it stops it later. Don't have a clue if that is appropriate to this. I guess if you read the package. But that's what I do, and that's what I've always done. So why stop now? So I'm going to place it, my Insulbright down so that I have my shiny side facing down. And I'm going to put my pot holder on it, and I told you to cut it 9 by 9. So I'm just going to. Oh, that was a little wrinkly, a little crooked cut, but that's okay. Because what I'm going to do, I don't mind if my Insulbright's a little bigger, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch this a little bit down to the pot holder, because I want it to stay in place when I put the two top pieces on. You could put this on and your two top pieces at the same time and do them all, but I prefer to do it this way. If I'm layering on something thicker, or I'm layering something on, I like to do one layer at a time. Now, you could spray it if you wanted to. I'm just not in a place where I can spray. So I'm going to do a little bit of stitching. And even if I just stitch a little bit on these two sides, say this much on these two sides, that's fine. It's just going to hold it in place. Because then I can go ahead and then I can trim everything. I can trim the Insulbright to exactly match my pot holder. Because when you cut your Insulbright 9 by 9, after you get done your quilting and trimming of this, it's not going to be the same size. And it's all right for it to be bigger, because once we stitch it and hold it down, then we can trim away that excess. So I kind of trim as I go. Okay? So let me move the machine a little closer again. I think you can see it okay. And I'm going to go to a 3.0 stitch length now, simply because I, in essence, have two layers of batting here. I have a layer of batting and a layer of Insulbright, and they're about the same thickness. I would have my walking foot on at this point, okay? And I'm going to show you, maybe, if you can see if I can get a little of the, I don't know if you'll be able to, let me move in a little. And you might be able to see, this might get a little puckery where one's pushing forward. Let's see. So I'm going close to my edge. So remember, I'm doing about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I would say between 1/4 and 1/2. Not now, but when I do my final stitching. So any stitching I do in the 1/4 inch, it's not going to show anywhere. So it isn't really doing much of it, because the baby lock is pretty good about stitching through thick things. But if you see your fabric is really starting to, see how if I rub my finger, see how it's doing like that? It's lifting up a little bit. Then you really want to make sure you have a walking foot. And again, I don't have to go all the way down and around. And then I'm just going to, oh, actually I got to back up again. Hold on, because now you can't see what I'm doing. There we go. So I'm just going to smooth this out so everything's nice and flat. And I stitched over on this side over here. So now I'm going to do a little stitching on this side. And even when I pick it up, I want to make sure that I keep it nice and smooth. And let me see if I can show you. I went too close to the edge. Now, sometimes, didn't really, hold on. Sometimes if you go too close to this edge, your fabric will start to roll under your needle. So this might be a little too close to the edge. It didn't roll, but I would say it was going to start to. So don't go too close to your edge. Plus, depending on what fabric you have, you might start fraying the fabric just by stitching too close to that edge. Okay, so I just did a little stitching here and a little stitching here, and that's just going to hold that. Let me go back up again. That's going to hold that down. Okay, so now I can go ahead and I'm going to trim out my Insulbright to match my potholder. That way you don't have to worry about if you get the Insulbright exactly square. So I'm using the edge of my potholder because remember we already squared that up to fix my Insulbright. I just want to be careful when I get over to this edge where the ribbon is. I don't want to cut the edge of that ribbon off yet. So I'm well aware of where my ribbon is. And I can just, I'm going to trim out under it. So I just picked my ribbon up and trimmed out under there. So you can see, when you see that my Insulbright, let me come in again. I have to do something about that light. Oh, that light. Okay. Can you see how my Insulbright isn't the same all the way across? See how there's more of it here and there's less of it there? So I don't worry about that because I'm trimming this up to my potholder straight edge. Oh, sorry. So if you have a little difficulty, cut your your batting or your insole bright a 10-inch square, because you'll just be able to square it up to your potholder. You'll be squaring up as you go. So now the insole bright's on, and it's just stitched a little bit on each side, but you see it's not going to go anywhere now. I don't need to stitch across the top. If you wanted to, you can, but you don't have to. You always want your batting and your insole bright against your feed dogs, not on the top where your foot has to try to get across, because the feed dogs help feed that resistant batting and insole bright. It helps feed it through. Okay? So let's stop here for a second, see if anybody has any questions, and give you a minute to catch up. I think, Gloria, I'm still in your time frame, not by much, but I'm still in it before you have to go. So now we need our back pieces. Okay, let me push this there so you can see it better. So you can see how, because I cut this down, so do you see how this 8 inches, I'm okay. Can you see that I have that little distance there? But this piece is going to cover, let me zoom in again. I've got the zoomer today. There we go. Oh, there we go. So see how this piece is going to be covering this one by quite a bit. So I'm going to take another inch off. And if I do that, I just make note of it. And it could be for this particular one that I trim this one more than normal, or whatever the case may be. But I'm just going to take another inch off. What I don't want is the top of this fabric to get caught in that top seam that I can't turn my potholder right side out. Well, that isn't going to work. Scissors and a ruler. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and take about an inch off. I don't suggest that you cut towards your nice potholder. That's probably not the best idea. Okay. See, part of these classes is you learn what not to do, because I've already made all those mistakes for you. Okay, so here's my potholder, and I'm facing it for you to see. I want to put down, so you want to make note of this, is I want to make sure that I put the folded one down first at the top of my potholder, and I'm lined up with this top, and I'm lined up with the sides. Okay? Now, if I trimmed enough off, this might be a little bigger, and if this one's a tad bigger, I don't mind. But if it was really a lot bigger, I would trim some of that off. Just because it kind of interferes with your eyeball looking at it. And you want to have that edge to sew by. Okay? So the folded piece is down first. The fold is facing into the center. So the raw edges of the top back are in line with the raw edges of the potholder. Okay? Then I'm going to take my big fabric back piece, and I'm going to lay that on top. And I want to make sure that the raw edges are lined up at the bottom and the two sides. And do you see how I've got this room left? If this was all the way up and I stitch across, I've closed up the potholder. I can't turn it right side out. And you'll do that probably. You just have to take the stitches out and do it again. It's not the end of the world. Okay? So I still have overlap here by about at least 1.5 inches. So let me zoom in again, because I know sometimes it makes more sense if you can see it. So see how this one is overlapping this piece? You see that? So you don't want a little overlap. A good 1.5 inches is good. You could come up, you could be a little higher. I just want you to be very careful that you don't get carried away and then like you bring it up to here, but then it's in your seam allowance still. So make sure you're like at least an inch, 1.5 inches away. I'd say at least 1.5 inches away from this top raw edge with this big fabric. Okay, so if you have to trim it, now's a good time to do that. Okay? So now I'm going to put some clips on, and I'm going to clip where the two pieces overlap each other first. And that's probably about all I need. You really can't pin this, it's too thick. And at this point, you probably really, 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 really need to have your walking foot on. And I'm just going to put a piece here. And I apologize, so I switched machines at the last minute, and I had the walking foot out for the other machine. It doesn't go to this one, and I didn't want to be scurrying around for that. So we're going to do a different pot holder next week, and so I'll show you how I put my, because this has a mechanical walking foot, so I will show you how I put my walking foot on and use it. If you feel like this back section is overhanging a lot, you can always flip this over and then trim around like we did, but it shouldn't be over by much, that you couldn't just take a little off of one edge. Okay, Christine is asking, do we want an edge on the big piece? I'm not sure. You mean a folded edge? I think that's what you might mean. The folded edge. Do we want a folded edge? No, this is going to be underneath. You can't see it. So see on this one, if I flip this open, that's a raw edge there. If that bothers you, and sometimes it does bother people, you can either serge that so it doesn't ravel, or just fold it under like a 1/2 inch and top stitch across. Okay, so if you're doing that, then you know how I cut that extra off? I wouldn't have cut that extra off. I'd have folded it under. So that can be finished. Okay, and you may want to do that because if you think it's pot holders that are going to get used a lot, you may want to do that. And again, if you have a serger, you can just serge across that edge before you put it down. Either way. Okay, you just want to make sure, Christine, even if you have this folded over and seamed, you still want that 1.5 inch crossover. So again, I cut some of mine off. You would leave yours on, so your back 8x9 would have been fine. You would just fold over about a half an inch or a little more. You might have trimmed a little off, but do about a 1/2 inch hem is what it is on it. Okay? Just remember, you still want to put the smaller top fabric down first, and then this bigger fabric is right side down because we're going to turn this right side out. Okay? So let me just stop for a minute, Christine, and make sure, does that make sense to you? I see 2 yeses, but I think I was waiting for a third one. I'm not sure. Oops, sorry, I got my head in the way again. Okay, got it. Okay, good. Okay. All right. We're going to do this same kind of back in the next pot holder next week so that you'll have a chance to do it again. I mean, you can always watch this video again, but most everything I do that I don't like to have like a satin stitch edge, I like a finished edge all the way around. If I can do this method, so I can turn it right side out here instead of leaving an opening somewhere and having to hand stitch it, I always try to do this if I can. So I don't have my walking foot on, but I'm going to give it a whirl anyways. So I'm stitching all the way around. There's no opening because the opening is right here. Nice big opening. And I want to be about a 1/2 inch away. And the reason I had that tape on before is because I wanted to remind myself that I want a 1/2 inch seam. And, you know, we have, what do they call? They're sticky things that go down where you want your fabric to run alongside of. But if you don't happen to have any handy, I wouldn't use masking tape or regular tape. This happens to be the paper embroidery tape. And I would just, because again, this isn't my prom dress, so I'm just going to put my ruler and I'm going to eyeball it about a half an inch away from my needle to the right of my needle. And I'm just going to put a piece of tape there. And it's flat, so it's not going to help me. It isn't going to like guide it through. And they do make guides. Gloria has a nice one. But I just, for my eye, I want to remember I'm doing a 1/2 inch because normally I'm doing like a 1/4 inch seam. So, and if you're between 1/2 and 1/4, that's fine. What you really want to do is make it the same all the way around, or at least make it nice and straight. Because there's no real center to this unless you did an embroidery that was centered. So if you had a 1/2 inch seam allowance here and a less than 1/2 inch seam allowance here, it isn't going to matter. You want it nice, as straight as you can get it. I never start at an end. Let me see if I can move this up a little more. So I don't start at the end, I'm going to start in the middle. Why fight with that edge of getting it started when you don't have to? And I'm not going to lock my stitches because when I come around, I'm going to go over where I started. So that seems like such a big seam allowance. So my 1/2 inch is here, and I'm a little left of my 1/2 inch. So I'm going a little smaller, and I can't stitch standing up. I'm on my cutting table, so I'm down low here, like here's my nose and here's my machine. So we'll make the best of it. And I'm going to hang on to this and just keep these together because I don't have my walking foot on. And if I see that little buckling that it does, let's see if you can see it. Let's see if I can move a little. Oh, let me move my cameraman's on vacation, which I don't have one, in case you actually thought he was on vacation. So can you, I don't know if you, so you can see it's starting to kind of do like this is, see? So I just have to keep an eye on that. And because I have pivot, I can keep stopping and my presser foot will go up and it'll let that fabric relax again. But I can see that it's already pushing my top fabric further than my underneath fabric, which is, it's okay. And it's simply because my feed dogs are pulling the bottom. There's no feed dogs pulling the top. So if I had the walking foot on, the feed dogs on the walking foot on the top would be pulling the fabric at the same time, synchronized to the bottom feed dogs. Guess I got closer, but now I just got my hand in the way. So again, it's not too bad, but I can see I've got about 1/8 of an inch more fabric hanging over this top right here. And that's okay because I can trim it off. Because we're going to trim it anyway. We're not going to leave the big seam allowance. And if you're not sure where to stop, just go right to the end. It doesn't matter. Now what I want to be careful of is when I come across here, let's see if I can get my little light. Is that a little better? Hold on. There. I want to make sure when I sew here that I don't let this flip up. And it's just way too much thickness to put a pin through. You can, but you're going to have a, you're going to have a bent pin when you're done. Now, I know that this fabric is hanging over. Can you see? Oh, see? How much didn't feed through with the bottom? So I just have to be aware that my seam allowance is really here. And see, if you had your walking foot on, you wouldn't have that issue. So I'm just going to be careful. And I want to just hang on to this. I'll try to keep my fingers out of the way as best I can. I just want to be careful when I come across here that that fabric doesn't flip up. Okay? And remember, I did have a little extra length and width on this top one than bottom because I had trimmed the bottom a little extra, the actual front of the potholder. But it's all okay. And I'm somewhere near the edge. I'm good. I don't have to go right off the edge. When I start sewing again, because I didn't lock in this direction, when I sew in this direction, I might want to lock it, and then it's going to go over the other stitching and go on. Otherwise, you can come down here with your needle down, turn the corner, and go. Okay? I was just trying to keep it simple for you. So now I'm really noticing not having the walking foot, and I want you to see that because you're gonna want to say, oh yeah, I don't feel like putting my walking foot on today. I don't really need it. I want you to see that, yeah, you probably really do. Now, can you see it all? This fabric just keeps pushing forward. I can take a hold of the bottom one and hold it a little more to help it, but it's just simply not having, it's all those layers, not necessarily always the thickness, but all those layers. The top layers can't all get fed by the bottom feed dogs. I'm probably starting to sound like a broken record. So if I don't want to go and sew off the edge or sew near to the edge, when I get near to where I know I'm going to be coming this way, my needle's down, I just turn. Now I want to be careful if I'm pushing this fabric to keep it flat, that I don't push this one underneath, and I don't want to push this guy over, flip him over somehow. And again, I wouldn't quite go that fast, but I know you don't want to watch, paint drying. If you were concerned about this, might get wear and tear, it shouldn't, but if you are, when you're coming by either side, so we were stitching this way, you can stitch down, stitch back, stitch again if you want to, and that just gives you extra strength there. Now, what I want to make sure I do is when I come down here now, I want to make sure that I line up right on top of the stitches where I started. That would probably be the most important thing of lining it up. Oh, I don't want to really go that fast. So I want to be right over the stitches I had to begin with. Then I'm going to lock it. And I will lock it with either, I'm trying to get some light there, with either lock in place or 3 forward, 3 back. Either one will work. but you definitely need the locking there. Okay. So let me push this back. I remember my water's back there. I can see it through my porthole of the machine. Okay. So we're almost done. So let me bring this back over. And let me push this back more out of the way. And let me put that light back up where it was. Okay. So now I need to trim this up. And I can use my rotary cutter, ruler, and mat. Or if you don't have that, you can use some big scissors. So this time I'll go for the big scissors. And let me see if I can come in just a tad more. And all I want to do is, let me come in even more here. I'm just going to follow along this edge, and I want to be about a 1/4 inch away. I don't want to get real close. And I really want to do it down. So my scissors are resting on the mat. So see, I want to be about that distance. Oops, sorry. So you can see how much we have there? We're going to trim it to like that. When I get to this corner, I'm going to go ahead and trim. I know you can't see it, but I want to keep the zoom in for a minute. So once I trim this away, I want to come to this corner, and I just want to cut the corner off. I'm not cutting in the stitches, I'm just cutting that corner off. So I'm going to go all the way around and then cut the other corners off. And we don't have to worry now that where that ribbon was, that ribbon's all sewn in. It got sewn in when we put the ribbon on, and then it got sewn in again when we went around this with the final seam. And I'm going to tell you, I can see right here, it looks like I bowed in my pot holder. So I'm cutting my corners. And you could round your corners when you're stitching if you wanted to. And if I was going to round my corners, so instead of stitching straight down and straight, if I wanted to just like round my corner, I would take my marker and I would just make a little, like a little backward C, something for me to follow. Okay? So your pot holder is done. You just have to turn it right side out and push the corners out. I think I have a light out somewhere. I feel like I hope your lighting's good, because I feel like I have just a spotlight coming down the middle. And I have my finger up in the corner, and I take my thumb and I push it through. That just helps you get those corners started. And before I do anything, poke my corners out or anything, I take this piece of tape off. Because there's nothing worse than you leave that tape on and then you iron it. And depending on what tape you used, you know, how pretty that might end up being. So I'm just going to poke out my corners. And I don't try to make my corners like squared. I like them a little rounded, so I don't get all involved with pushing it so that it's perfectly square, because then half the time you end up either ripping your stitches or poking through your fabric, or we get a little stronger than we should. Okay, now I want to show you a little something about, so we're all done. Quick little pot holder, and now you can see that stitching across there. So see how this is standing up like this? So that's from the back, and that's fine. We can just pull that back. But when you press this, make sure, I always start from the right side, and I'm taking my hands and see how I'm just pulling that fabric down, because I want to put it down and just press straight down. Let me back up again. I want to just press straight down with my iron and steam, and then just leave it for a second. Because if you press and you get it all steamy and everything's all really hot, and you pick it up, you're going to lose what you just tried to press in. So you just press it and just leave it for a second. Don't be in such a big rush. And then I would come to the bottom and do the same thing. If I have an issue, and generally it's like on the side. So if I have an issue where I keep pressing this and I press like a crease into it, if I take this and open this up, and it's not as easy on a pot holder, but if I open this up, and let me pull this out here, and I can't get my iron today close enough to show you, but if I just like get in here and pretend this is the point of my iron, and I just press this flat, and my mouse is going all over the place, which means I'm pressing the seam flat, that when I bring it back up like this, I won't have that crease. Even if I can't get to the edges, once I get this part gone, it's okay. But I always make sure I press from the front so that I know the back fabric isn't showing through. Oh, Gloria, you used your walking foot. Good. I'm glad. Yes, that walking foot does make a difference. Okay? So always press, press, press. And then once the front is good, come around and then press the back. Because what you really want to do is give a little extra press where that seam allowance is and kind of smush it. So it ends up being like the rest of it. So there's our pot holder for today. Our next time pot holder is going to have 4 borders around and quilting in the middle. And I will put up I'll be a little faster, I'll put up the cutting instructions on Facebook, because I don't think there's anywhere I can leave it on the YouTube side. I'll try to figure that out. No, I wouldn't do. I don't want to put it on this one, because then people looking at it will be cutting for the wrong thing. So I'll just have to put it on Facebook, the Miss LoreensSchoolhouse Facebook, of what the cutting instructions again. But again, you're going to have batting, you're going to have Insulbright, you're going to have a ribbon. The back is going to be cut the same, but again, I'll put all the instructions up for cutting again. And the front is going to have the focus fabric in the middle with a border going all the way around. I'm trying to do some different types of pot holders. I think I've got like 3 weeks, so I got 2 more. So that if you're making them for gifts, you'll have different choices of pot holders, rather than if I do a pot holder now and then a pot holder in 3 weeks and you go, oh shoot, I wished I'd have seen that before. So I'm going to do like 3 pot holders, and then we'll go on to something else. And these are just going to all be for Christmas gifts, or yourself gifts, or whatever you want, keeping it fairly simple. You can get fancier if you have an embroidery machine and embroider, but what you want to make sure is don't embroider and don't sew on the Insulbright. Put that on after. So even if you wanted to embroider on this quilted part of the front, do it before. You can do it with the batting, that's fine, but do it before you do the Insulbright, if that makes finish. Oh, Christine, you finished. Good for you. So you girls that finished or are going to be finishing, if you would just put a picture up on my Facebook, or email me at sewing at the right spot, THERIGHTSPOT.com, and I'll put it up there for you if you want. Because the other viewers like to see what everybody's doing with the different fabrics, and they like to ooh and ah over it. So next week, I can't start until 1:30 because I have to work till 12:30. So one Saturday a month, it'll be at 1:30, and I'll put a reminder up on Facebook that it'll be at 1:30. When I figure out how to put a time up on YouTube, that'd be really great. I'll try, like that's what I tried to do today, and then it got me all, it told me I couldn't get in, and then I had to start a new one, and, all that kind of stuff that you don't really need to know about. So I hope everybody had a good time. Be kind enough to subscribe to my channel. Ring the little bell so you'll get a notification, because I do put other videos up in between that aren't live. So you'll get a notification of any time I do that, and I appreciate it. So I'm just going to pause for a second before I stop the stream, because I don't want to cut off the end at all. After the stream goes up for you to view all the time, I have to wait till tomorrow before I can go in and edit that beginning out. So it'll be a little shorter after, once it gets loaded up for good. So thank you again. I hope you all had a good time, enjoyed your potholder. Now make sure you make some more. Try some different decorative stitches. Use some of those decorative stitches. If you don't have a lot of decorative stitches, just pick a pretty thread and do a zigzag or a couple of straight stitches. Excuse me. Venture out there a little bit. And again, thank you everybody for joining in, and have a great day.